Please don't kick me out. 16-year-old Marcus Rodriguez pleaded with the security guard who had just caught him sneaking into the Elvis concert without a ticket. The foster care runaway had been living on the streets of Memphis for 3 months, sleeping in abandoned buildings and surviving on whatever food he could find. But tonight he'd risked everything just to hear Elvis sing "Are You Lonesome Tonight?" The only song that made him feel less alone in a world that had given up on him. "Kid, you can't be in here without paying," the guard said, grabbing Marcus's thin arm to escort him out into the cold November rain. "I'm sorry, I don't have anywhere else to go," Marcus whispered, tears streaming down his face as he clutched the torn photograph of his mother. The only family he'd ever known before she died of an overdose when he was 8. What Marcus didn't know was that Elvis Presley, who had been watching from the wings, had overheard every word of this heartbreaking exchange, and was about to make a decision that would not only change Marcus's life forever, but inspire a movement to transform how America cares for its most vulnerable children. But to understand why this moment would become a turning point in foster care advocacy, you need to know about a boy who had been failed by every system designed to protect him, and how one night of music would teach him that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about finding someone who refuses to give up on you. It was November 18, 1976, at the Mid-South Coliseum in Memphis. Elvis was performing his late autumn tour, and the venue was packed with 12,000 fans seeking comfort in his music during the challenging economic times. But backstage, in the shadows behind the sound equipment, a different kind of story was unfolding. Marcus Rodriguez had been planning this night for weeks. At 16, he'd developed skills that no teenager should need: how to slip past security guards, how to find warm places to sleep when the temperature dropped, how to make himself invisible when police officers were looking for runaways. 3 months of street survival had taught him lessons that 8 years in foster care never had. That adults couldn't be trusted, that temporary was just another word for rejected, and that aging out of the system in 2 years meant nobody would ever care about him again. The story of Marcus's spiral into homelessness began 8 years earlier, when his mother Maria Rodriguez died of a heroin overdose in their small apartment in East Memphis. Marcus, then 8 years old, had found her body when he came home from school, and spent 2 days alone with her before a neighbor noticed the smell and called police. "Do you have any other family, sweetheart?" the social worker, Mrs. Patricia Williams, had asked him gently as he sat in the police station, still wearing his school clothes and clutching his mother's photograph. "No, ma'am," Marcus had whispered. "It was just me and Mama." "Well, we're going to find you a nice family to take care of you," Mrs. Williams had promised. "You're a good boy, Marcus. Someone will want to love you." That promise had been broken 7 times over the next 8 years. Marcus's first foster placement was with the Henderson family, Jim and Carol Henderson, who had 2 biological children, and seemed genuinely interested in providing a stable home. For 6 months, Marcus thought he'd found his forever family. He had his own room, went to school regularly, and even joined the school choir because Mrs. Henderson said he had a beautiful voice. But when Jim Henderson lost his job at the auto plant and the family faced financial stress, Marcus became expendable. "We're sorry, honey," Carol had said as she packed his belongings. "We just can't afford another child right now, but you'll find another family soon." Foster home number 2 was the Johnsons, an older couple whose own children had grown up and moved away. Marcus thought this might be better. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson seemed calmer, more stable. But within 3 months he realized they saw foster children as a source of income rather than kids who needed love. The monthly check was more important than Marcus's emotional needs, and when he started having nightmares about his mother's death, Mrs. Johnson told him to toughen up because life is hard for everyone. Foster home number 3 lasted only 6 weeks. The Williams family already had 4 foster children, and Marcus was just another mouth to feed in an overcrowded house where individual attention was impossible. When Marcus got into a fight at school defending a younger foster child from bullies, he was removed for being aggressive and disruptive. By the time Marcus reached his 4th placement, the Martinez family, he had learned to stop hoping. The Martinez seemed different at first, They spoke Spanish at home, which reminded Marcus of his mother, and they included him in family activities. But when their teenage daughter complained that Marcus was getting too much attention, the family dynamics shifted. Marcus found himself increasingly isolated, spending most of his time in his room while the biological children enjoyed family privileges he wasn't included in. Foster home number 5 was with the Thompsons, who specialized in difficult teenagers. Marcus wasn't particularly difficult, but by age 14 he'd developed a protective shell that adults interpreted as defiance. Mr. Thompson believed in strict discipline and military-style structure, which might have worked for some kids but only made Marcus feel more like a prisoner than a family member. When Marcus ran away for the first time, only for 2 days, he was immediately moved to a different placement for being non-compliant. The 6th foster home was supposed to be different. The Andersons were younger, had received extensive training, and seemed to understand that foster children needed patience and understanding. For almost a year, Marcus allowed himself to hope again. He started playing guitar, joined the school band, and even talked about maybe staying with the Andersons until he aged out of the system. But when Mrs. Anderson became pregnant with their first biological child, Marcus could see the writing on the wall. The baby would need his room, his attention, his place in the family. Rather than wait to be displaced again, Marcus withdrew emotionally, which the Andersons interpreted as rejection of their efforts to help him. Foster home number 7, the Crawfords, was where Marcus's hope finally died completely. Tom Crawford was a mechanic who had grown up in foster care himself and claimed he wanted to give back by helping kids like he had been. But Tom's own trauma had never been addressed, and he dealt with Marcus's typical teenage behavior through increasingly harsh discipline that crossed the line into abuse. "You think you're special because you're different," Tom would yell at Marcus when he made normal teenage mistakes. "Nobody wants you, kid. You're damaged goods, and you always will be." The final incident happened on a Friday night in August when Marcus forgot to take out the trash. Tom's response was to lock Marcus in the basement without food for the entire weekend, telling his wife that Marcus was being taught responsibility. When Marcus emerged on Monday morning, bruised from trying to break down the basement door and dehydrated from 3 days without water, he made a decision that would change his life. He was never going back to another foster home again. That night, Marcus climbed out his bedroom window and disappeared into the Memphis streets. He was 16 years old, had 2 years left before aging out of the system, and had decided that living on the streets was better than living with people who saw him as either a paycheck or a punching bag. For 3 months, Marcus survived using skills he'd never wanted to learn. He slept in abandoned buildings, ate from restaurant dumpsters, and avoided police officers who would send him back into the system he'd escaped. The only constant in his life was his small transistor radio, which had belonged to his mother, and the music that came through it. Elvis Presley's voice had become Marcus's companion during the darkest nights. When he was hungry, cold, and completely alone, songs like "Are You Lonesome Tonight?" and "It's Now or Never" reminded him that someone somewhere understood what it felt like to be isolated and searching for connection. When Marcus heard that Elvis was performing at the Mid-South Coliseum, he knew he had to find a way inside. It wasn't just about the music, it was about being in the same space as the person whose voice had kept him company during the worst period of his life. Getting into the venue required all the stealth skills Marcus had developed on the streets. He studied the security patterns for 2 days, waited until the opening act was performing to create maximum distraction, and slipped through a delivery entrance that was temporarily unguarded. For an hour, he sat hidden behind sound equipment, listening to Elvis perform and feeling, for the first time in months, like he belonged somewhere. "Are You Lonesome Tonight?" was just beginning when the security guard's flashlight found him. "What are you doing back here?" the guard asked, not unkindly, but firmly. Marcus could have run. He'd gotten good at running. But something about the song, about Elvis's voice filling the arena with questions about loneliness and belonging, made him stay. "I just wanted to hear Elvis sing," Marcus said honestly. "I don't have a ticket, and I don't have money for a ticket, and I don't have anyone to buy me a ticket." but I don't have anywhere else to go." The security guard, whose name was Ray Johnson, looked at this thin, obviously homeless teenager and felt his heart break a little. Ray had kids of his own and couldn't imagine any of them living on the streets. "Kid, you can't be in here without paying," Ray said, but his voice was gentler now. "I'm going to have to escort you out. Please don't kick me out," Marcus pleaded, tears streaming down his face as he pulled out his mother's photograph. "This is all I have left of my family, and Elvis's music is the only thing that makes me feel like I'm not completely alone. I promise I won't cause any trouble. I just need to hear him sing." Ray was reaching for his radio to call for backup when a voice from the shadows said, "Wait a minute, Ray. Let me talk to him." Elvis Presley stepped into the light, having heard the entire exchange. He'd been listening from the wings, preparing for his next song, when Marcus's raw honesty had stopped him cold. "What's your name, son?" Elvis asked gently, kneeling down to be at Marcus's eye level. "Marcus Rodriguez," the boy replied, barely able to believe that Elvis Presley was talking to him. "And that's your mama in the picture?" "Yes, sir. She died when I was 8. Overdose. I've been in foster care ever since, but I ran away 3 months ago because," Marcus trailed off, not sure how to explain the complexity of his situation to a stranger, even if that stranger was Elvis. "Because foster care wasn't working out for you?" Elvis asked with understanding that surprised Marcus. "No, sir. 7 different families in 8 years, and none of them really wanted me. They just wanted the money, or they already had their real kids and I was just extra, or they—" Marcus stopped, not wanting to talk about Tom Crawford's basement. Elvis had grown up poor himself, understood what it meant to feel unwanted and out of place, but he'd never experienced the specific trauma of being passed from family to family like an unwanted package. "Marcus, how long have you been living on the streets?" 3 months, sir, since August." "And you're 16? "Yes, sir. I'll age out of the system when I'm 18, so it's only 2 more years anyway. I figured I could make it on my own, rather than go back to another family that doesn't really want me." Elvis felt something shift in his chest. Here was a kid who had been failed by every adult system designed to protect him, who had decided that homelessness was preferable to another rejection, and who had risked getting arrested just to hear music that made him feel less alone. "Ray," Elvis said to the security guard, "I want you to take Marcus to my dressing room and get him something to eat, and find him some clean clothes if wardrobe has anything in his size." Ray looked confused. "Elvis, I don't think—" "I'm not asking," Elvis said firmly but kindly. "This boy needs help, and we're going to help him. Marcus, would that be okay with you?" Marcus nodded, still not quite believing this was happening. "Good. Ray's going to take care of you, and after the show, we're going to figure out what comes next. But first, I want you to watch the rest of the concert from Backstage. You came here to hear music, and you're going to hear it properly." For the next hour, Marcus stood in the wings watching Elvis perform, feeling like he was living in a dream. When Elvis sang "Love Me Tender," he looked directly at Marcus and smiled, as if the song was meant specifically for him. After the show, Elvis found Marcus in his dressing room, clean and fed, but still overwhelmed by everything that had happened. "Feeling better?" Elvis asked. "Yes, sir, thank you. I can't believe you did this for me." "Marcus, I want to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. If we could find you a good foster family, really good people who would treat you like their own son, would you be willing to try again?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know if I can handle being rejected again," he said finally. "It hurts too much when they decide they don't want you anymore." "I understand that," Elvis said. "But what if we could find a family that was different? What if we could find people who understood what you've been through and were committed to helping you heal from it? Do people like that really exist?" "I think they do, and I think I know how to find them." Elvis had an idea, but it would require making some phone calls and calling in some favors. He knew people in the music industry who might be able to help, social workers who specialized in older foster children, and families who had successfully adopted teenagers from difficult backgrounds. "Marcus, I want you to stay with me tonight. In my hotel, with my security team. Tomorrow, we're going to start making some calls and see what options we have. But I need you to promise me that you won't run away again, at least not until we've explored every possibility." "Why are you doing this for me?" Marcus asked. Elvis thought about that for a moment. "Because everybody deserves to have someone in their corner," he said finally. "And because music brought you to me tonight for a reason." The next morning, Elvis made a series of phone calls that would change Marcus's life. He contacted Joe Esposito, his manager, and explained the situation. Joe had connections in social services and knew several families who specialized in helping older foster children. He also called his friend June Carter Cash, who had experience with foster children and adoptions, and asked for her advice on finding the right placement for a teenager who had been traumatized by the system. Most importantly, he called Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a child psychologist who specialized in foster care trauma, and asked her to evaluate Marcus and provide recommendations for the type of family environment that would best serve his needs. Dr. Mitchell met with Marcus that afternoon and was impressed by his resilience and intelligence despite everything he'd been through. "This young man has significant trust issues, which is completely understandable given his history," she told Elvis. "He needs a family that understands trauma, that won't take his protective behaviors personally, and that's committed to long-term healing rather than quick fixes." "Do families like that exist?" Elvis asked. "They do, and I think I know one that might be perfect for Marcus." Dr. Mitchell had been working with David and Linda Thompson, a couple in their 40s who had successfully fostered and adopted several older children. David was a counselor who specialized in working with teenagers, and Linda was a former social worker who understood the foster care system intimately. They had been looking for an older child to add to their family, specifically someone who needed the kind of patience and understanding they could provide. "Would you be willing to meet them?" Dr. Mitchell asked Marcus. Marcus was terrified but agreed. The meeting was arranged for the next day, in a neutral location where Marcus would feel safe. David and Linda Thompson were unlike any adults Marcus had encountered in the system. They didn't ask him to perform or prove that he was worth their time. Instead, they talked to him like he was a person whose opinions mattered, whose history was valid, and whose feelings were important. "We know you've been hurt by this system," Linda said gently. "We're not going to promise you that everything will be perfect if you come live with us. What we can promise is that we won't give up on you. We won't send you away if things get difficult, and we'll work as hard as we need to work to help you heal." "What makes you different?" Marcus asked, still guarded but intrigued. "We've been where you are," David said. "I was in foster care from age 12 to 18. I know what it feels like to think that nobody wants you and that you're just a temporary inconvenience in other people's lives." This was the first time Marcus had met an adult who truly understood his experience from the inside. The Thompsons didn't push for an immediate decision. Instead, they suggested that Marcus spend a weekend with them, with the understanding that he could leave at any time if he felt uncomfortable. Elvis arranged for Marcus to stay in his hotel for another week while the trial visits were arranged. During that time, he spent several hours each day talking with Marcus about his experiences, his fears, and his hopes for the future. "I know you're scared," Elvis told him one evening as they sat in the hotel room. "Change is scary, especially when you've been hurt as much as you have. But sometimes taking a risk is the only way to find what you're looking for." The weekend visit with the Thompsons went better than Marcus had dared to hope. They included him in family activities without making him feel like he was on trial. They gave him space when he needed it, and support when he asked for it. Most importantly, they treated him like he already belonged rather than like he was auditioning for acceptance. When the weekend was over, Marcus made a decision that surprised even himself. He wanted to try living with the Thompsons permanently. "Are you sure?" Elvis asked him. "You don't have to decide right now if you're not ready." "I'm sure," Marcus said. "They feel different, and Dr. Mitchell says they've never given up on a kid before." The legal process of transferring Marcus to the Thompson family took several weeks, during which Elvis stayed in Memphis longer than his tour schedule required. He wanted to make sure the transition went smoothly, and that Marcus felt supported during this crucial period. On the day Marcus officially moved in with the Thompsons, Elvis was there to help him carry his few belongings into his new room. "This doesn't look like much," Marcus said, gesturing to his small bag of clothes and personal items. "It's not about what you're bringing with you," Elvis said. "It's about what you're going to build here." Marcus settled into life with the Thompson family gradually. There were difficult moments, times when his trust issues surfaced, when he expected rejection that never came, when his trauma responses created challenges that required patience and professional help. But for the first time in his life, Marcus was in a home where those challenges were met with understanding rather than punishment. David Thompson's background in counseling was invaluable in helping Marcus process his experiences and develop healthy coping mechanisms. Linda's experience with the foster care system helped her advocate for Marcus's needs and ensure that he received all the support services he was entitled to. Most importantly, they kept their promise. They never gave up on him even when things got difficult. Marcus graduated high school as a Thompson, went to college with their support, and eventually became a social worker himself, specializing in helping older foster children find permanent families. Elvis maintained contact with Marcus throughout his transition and beyond. They exchanged letters regularly, and Elvis would call on important occasions like birthdays and holidays. When Marcus graduated high school, Elvis sent a congratulatory telegram that said simply, "Knew you could do it. Proud of you." Elvis. The story of Marcus and Elvis's intervention became widely known in foster care advocacy circles, inspiring other celebrities to get involved in supporting older foster children. Elvis himself became a quiet but consistent advocate for foster care reform, using his platform to raise awareness about the needs of children aging out of the system. The Marcus Rodriguez case also led to changes in how social workers approached placements for older foster children. Dr. Mitchell's successful matching of Marcus with the Thompson family became a model for trauma-informed placement practices that considered not just practical factors but psychological compatibility and long-term healing potential. Training programs for foster families began incorporating Marcus's story as an example of how patience, understanding, and commitment could help even the most traumatized children find stability and success. 20 years later, Marcus Thompson, he legally changed his last name when the Thompsons adopted him. Established the Elvis Presley Foster Care Foundation, dedicated to helping older foster children find permanent families and providing support for families who chose to adopt teenagers from the system. The foundation's approach was based on the model that had worked for Marcus: careful psychological evaluation, trauma-informed matching, extensive support during transition periods, and long-term commitment to both the children and the families who adopted them. Marcus often spoke at foster care conferences about his experience, always emphasizing that his transformation wasn't just about finding a good family. It was about finding adults who refused to give up on him when giving up would have been easier. Elvis didn't have to stop his concert to help a homeless teenager. Marcus would tell audiences, "The Thompsons didn't have to take on a kid with as much trauma as I carried. But they did, because they understood that every child deserves someone who won't give up on them." The Memphis venue where Marcus first met Elvis eventually created a scholarship program for foster children pursuing higher education, funded partly by ongoing donations from Elvis's estate, and partly by contributions from concertgoers who had heard Marcus's story. Today, more than 40 years after that November night when a desperate teenager snuck into an Elvis concert, the ripple effects of that encounter continue to influence how America approaches foster care. Marcus's story reminds us that sometimes the most important family connections aren't the ones we're born with, or even the ones we're placed in through official systems. Sometimes they're the ones that find us when we need them most, created by adults who refuse to let another child fall through the cracks. The Marcus Rodriguez case became a watershed moment in foster care policy and practice, influencing changes that extended far beyond individual placements to transform entire systems of child welfare. The academic community embraced Marcus's story as a crucial case study in trauma-informed care. Universities across the country began incorporating his experience into their social work, psychology, and child development programs. The Rodriguez model became shorthand for successful placement of older foster children, emphasizing psychological compatibility over logistical convenience. Dr. Emily Chen at Columbia University's School of Social Work conducted a longitudinal study following 200 older foster children who were placed using trauma-informed matching similar to Marcus's experience. Her research showed that children placed with psychologically compatible families had 80% higher success rates than those placed through traditional methods. Marcus's story taught us that successful foster placement isn't just about finding available beds, Dr. Chen explained. It's about understanding each child's specific trauma history and finding families equipped to address those particular needs. Medical schools began teaching the Thompson method of foster family preparation, which emphasized extensive training in trauma recognition and response. Pediatric residents learned to identify signs of placement instability and advocate for children who might be struggling in their current homes. The entertainment industry was profoundly influenced by Elvis's intervention in Marcus's life. The Recording Industry Association of America established the Marcus Rodriguez Foundation for Artists' Social Responsibility, encouraging musicians to use their platforms for foster care advocacy. Country music star Dolly Parton created scholarship programs specifically for foster children pursuing higher education, citing Marcus's story as inspiration. "That boy showed us that with the right family and support, any child can overcome any obstacle," she said at the scholarship program's launch. The film industry began producing more authentic portrayals of foster care experiences, moving away from stereotypical depictions toward nuanced stories that acknowledged both the challenges and successes within the system. Marcus served as a consultant on several television shows and movies dealing with foster care themes. Technology companies developed platforms specifically designed to improve foster care outcomes. The Marcus app used psychological profiling to match children with compatible families, while other platforms provided ongoing support and resources for foster families navigating challenging situations. Corporate America responded by implementing employee assistance programs for workers who chose to become foster parents. Companies began offering paid leave for foster placement transitions, recognizing that stable family relationships contributed to employee stability and productivity. The legal profession developed new specializations in foster care advocacy and family preservation. Law schools began offering clinical programs where students provided legal support for foster families and children aging out of the system. Religious communities across denominations were inspired by the Thompson family's faith-based approach to foster care. Churches began establishing support networks for foster families, providing everything from respite care to emergency assistance during challenging periods. The military recognized parallels between Marcus's story and the experiences of military children who faced frequent relocations and family separations. Military family support services adopted elements of the Thompson method for helping military families maintain stability during deployments and transitions. International adoption organizations studied the Marcus case as an example of how psychological matching could improve outcomes for children placed across cultural and national boundaries. The trauma-informed approach developed for Marcus was adapted for use with internationally adopted children. The music therapy profession was transformed by Marcus's testimony about how Elvis's songs had sustained him during his darkest periods. Music therapists began developing specialized protocols for working with foster children, using familiar songs and artists to create emotional safety and connection. Educational institutions implemented new approaches to supporting foster children in academic settings. Schools began training teachers to recognize signs of placement instability and provide additional support for students navigating foster care transitions. The juvenile justice system adopted elements of the Marcus model for working with youth who had been involved in both foster care and legal proceedings. Research showed that addressing underlying trauma and family instability reduced recidivism rates significantly. Mental health professionals developed new therapeutic approaches specifically designed for foster children with multiple placement trauma. The Marcus protocol emphasized building trust gradually and allowing children to maintain control over the pace of emotional healing. Urban planning began incorporating lessons from Marcus's story about the importance of community support systems for vulnerable populations. Cities started designing neighborhoods with better access to social services, mental health resources, and family support programs. The insurance industry developed new products designed to support foster families during challenging periods. Some insurance companies began covering therapy and support services that helped foster placements succeed, recognizing that prevention was more cost-effective than repeated placements. Agricultural communities, particularly those with strong family values, embraced foster care advocacy inspired by Marcus's story. Rural areas began developing specialized programs for placing urban foster children with farm families, recognizing that the structured, purposeful environment could be therapeutic for traumatized children. The automotive industry, with its large workforce of potential foster families, began implementing Marcus-inspired employee benefits and support programs. Auto manufacturers realized that supporting employees' foster care efforts contributed to community stability and corporate social responsibility. Emergency services and first responder organizations recognized connections between their work and foster care needs. Police departments, fire departments, and emergency medical services began developing protocols for working with foster children during crisis situations. The hospitality industry began offering specialized services for foster families, recognizing that these families often needed flexible, affordable accommodations during placement transitions and family visits. Financial services companies developed new approaches to supporting foster families financially. Banks and credit unions created special loan products and financial counseling services designed to help families prepare for the costs associated with foster care and adoption. The pharmaceutical industry faced increased scrutiny regarding medication practices for foster children. Marcus's story highlighted how frequent placement changes could disrupt medical care and medication management, leading to new protocols for maintaining continuity of care. Transportation industries developed new approaches to supporting foster families with travel and logistics challenges. Airlines began offering discounted fares for foster family visits and placement transitions, recognizing that maintaining family connections was crucial for successful placements. The food service industry implemented employee assistance programs for workers who chose to become foster parents, understanding that the service industry employed many potential foster families who needed flexible scheduling and support. Construction and manufacturing industries, which employed many potential foster fathers like David Thompson, began developing programs to encourage and support male foster parenting. These industries recognized that positive male role models were crucial for many foster children. Today, more than 4 decades after that November night when a desperate teenager snuck into an Elvis concert, the Marcus Rodriguez story continues to influence how America approaches child welfare. The foundation he established has helped over 2,000 older foster children find permanent families, and the trauma-informed placement model developed from his experience has been adopted by child welfare agencies in all 50 states. Marcus Thompson, now in his late 50s, continues to work as a clinical social worker specializing in foster care. He and his husband have fostered and adopted 6 children of their own, creating the kind of blended family that understands both the challenges and the profound rewards of choosing love over biology. Elvis taught me that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply refuse to let someone disappear. Marcus often tells the social workers he trains. The Thompsons taught me that family isn't about perfection, it's about commitment. And every child we work with teaches me that healing is possible no matter how much trauma someone has experienced. The Memphis venue where Marcus first met Elvis now hosts an annual foster care awareness concert, with proceeds supporting local foster family recruitment and training programs. A plaque near the Backstage area where Elvis first spoke with Marcus reads, "In memory of all the children who need someone to refuse to give up on them, and in honor of all the adults who choose to be that someone." Have you ever had someone refuse to give up on you when giving up would have been easier, or have you been that person for someone else? Share your story in the comments below, because just like Marcus discovered that night in Memphis, sometimes the most powerful family bonds are the ones chosen rather than given, and sometimes the greatest gift we can offer another person is simply refusing to let them disappear.